Amid the glittering lights of Fairmont Crest, one moment ripped every mask apart. Bill dropped to his knees before Dani, owned his mistakes, and begged for one more chance, leaving Haley stunned and breathless. From that second on, whispers turned into a storm, handshakes into double-edged knives, and a silent war of love, power, and pride officially ignited. Today, we'll rewind the past to see why everything led to this explosive kneel, unpack Haley's hidden moves, read the fractures in Dani's heart, and follow Bill's self-destructive sprint to win back the woman he loves. Get ready to walk through the shadows no one wants to mention, because behind those dazzling gates, only one question remains: who will pay the price first? If you love Behind the Gates drama, hit subscribe and the bell. Don't forget to like and comment. Whose side are you on, Haley, Dani, or Bill? Fairmont Crest teaches a cruel lesson about gravity: everything that climbs too high eventually crashes in public. Long before the glittering staircase became the stage where Bill sank to one knee, the fall had been in motion, stitched by choices that looked elegant in the moment and poisonous in hindsight. Bill built his image on charity galas and clean-handed deals, but under the lights he mistook applause for safety and silence for loyalty. He met Dani when ambition in both of them felt like a shared language, the kind that makes two people move through rooms with synchronized steps, convinced that the world will forgive any sin if it is wrapped in beauty. Then came the detours that look small until they become the highway: the night in Las Vegas when Dani married Andre out of impulse and armor, the slow drift of Bill into a marriage with Haley that promised calm and delivered strategy, the way secrets multiplied like mirrors until no one could tell what was real. Haley arrived with the polish of someone who can mimic love so well that even truth gets drowsy. She learned the gate codes, the favorite vintages, the philanthropic scripts, and more importantly, the vulnerabilities disguised as taste. She aligned herself with people who understood leverage better than affection, the kind of allies who don't sign greeting cards but do sign off on policies. Randy watched from the edges, an unremarkable figure in a sea of remarkable faces, the perfect vantage point for someone who collects mistakes the way others collect art. The plan never needed a mastermind, just a calendar: isolate Bill from the few voices who talked about soul rather than optics, push him toward a life where every kindness had a receipt, then nudge him over a ledge he wouldn't see until he was airborne. Meanwhile, Dani wore a strong face that fooled almost everyone except the quiet hour before sleep. She had chosen Andre because he seemed like a closed door she could stand behind, a promise that she wouldn't have to feel the tremors of unfinished love. Andre admired the idea of Dani more than the woman, and his heart kept wandering back to Ashley with a shame that looked like discipline from the outside. Their marriage became a performance of mutual courtesy, two people who knew how to set a table but not how to set each other at ease. The city began whispering about Bill's change in temperature: he smiled without warmth and shook hands without remembering textures. Charity boards tolerated it, investors rationalized it, Haley encouraged it. Then came the detail that matters because it is so easy to dismiss: the day Bill's physician mentioned stress markers and Haley quietly adjusted the dose of reassurance. Small edits to routine, little nudges to appetite, a calendar that filled with events Dani would never attend. It is easy to deny intention when the evidence is hidden inside normal days. The risk with building a life on appearances is that the first crack always looks like a trick of the light. It wasn't until a near miss, the kind of accident that gets logged as bad luck, that Bill finally felt the gap between who he was and where he had been led. In the aftermath, memory returned with sharp edges, and with it a question that made him nauseous: when had his marriage become a corridor with locks on the wrong side? He began to look at Haley not as comfort but as choreography. He found documents he wasn't supposed to read yet and messages that told only half the truth but all of the tone. He saw Randy in places where Randy shouldn't be. He noted insurance updates spun as responsible planning, the sort of paperwork nobody challenges because no one wants to be the person who distrusts prudence. While Bill rebuilt his sense of danger, Dani rebuilt the boundaries she wished she'd kept. She watched Andre stand in doorways that used to belong to Bill's silhouette and understood that marriages based on protection eventually feel like cages when the danger fades. She didn't chase Bill, she disciplined memory and tried to grow a future out of dry soil. But memory is water by another name. It found its way back. Bill finally recognized his life had been narrowed to the shape of someone else's comfort, and like anyone who wakes up in a moving car with the wrong destination, he reached for the first landmark that once felt like home. He didn't plan a spectacle. He planned a confession. Fairmont Crest, however, is a predator that eats privacy. The night of the fundraiser, he wore contrition the way others wore tuxedos. The crowd thought it was charisma. Haley thought it was routine. Dani thought it was a storm warning. When Bill crossed the room, he wasn't following music, he was following a line only he could see, leading back to the moment where everything veered off. He knelt not for a photo but for gravity, a man finally acknowledging that pride had been his worst choreographer. He asked for a chance not because it was strategic but because it was the only sentence left in a language that had been exhausted by pretense. The room fractured instantly. Dani felt the old ache bloom like a bruise in reverse, starting deep and rising to the skin. Haley understood impact without needing the words. She has always known how to count losses before they are announced. Her face didn't crumble, it crystallized. In that freeze, she calculated who saw what, which phones were already up, which allies would answer tonight and which would wait until morning. That is the moment the show inside the show began, the quiet trades of loyalty, the pre-drafted messages, the favors owed and called in. Bill thought he had thrown his heart on the table, he had actually detonated the seating chart. Gossip did what it always does at Fairmont Crest, it grew legs, then teeth. To some, Bill's plea was proof of courage, to others, weakness. But to Haley it was an audit. She understood the arithmetic of reputations and knew this equation would only balance if someone else absorbed the debt. Her smile at Dani across the ballroom was the kind that photographs as graciousness and reads in person as a warning. The night ended with fake goodbyes and very real agendas. Dani drove home with a conscience that wouldn't quiet, while Bill sat in a dark kitchen with the kind of relief that hurts because it is late. Haley poured a drink she didn't taste. Outside, the community slept on their opinions like new pillows. Inside, the three of them began the longest night. Every crisis at Fairmont Crest comes with stationery. The next morning, invitations for sympathy breakfasts and discreet debriefs arrived with the speed of rumor. Public narratives organized themselves, Bill as repentant romantic, Dani as besieged paragon, Haley as wronged wife. But private narratives are more powerful because they do not need cameras. Haley moved first. She visited people who hate conflict but love stability and reminded them how many charity projects bear her fingerprints. She traded on fatigue, that precious resource in a town exhausted by scandal. She positioned Bill's display as an attack on decorum and described Dani as the beneficiary of chaos. She didn't need to prove villainy, she needed to prove inconvenience. Meanwhile, Randy made himself useful in ways polite people never see: pressure on vendors, whispers to journalists who pride themselves on discretion, a careful trail of small, true facts that point to large, false conclusions. A cancelled security contract here, a revised meeting transcript there, clarifications that appear responsible and land like fear. If you can't erase a man's kneeling, you can contaminate its meaning. Bill tried to fix a life with honesty and learned the first rule of confessions in a predatory ecosystem: truth is not currency, narrative is. He set up meetings to explain, but the people who would forgive him could not protect him, and the people who could protect him were too risk-aware to be moved by sincerity. Contracts tightened in his absence. Projects that had always tolerated his leadership began to prefer the quiet competence of Haley's interim guidance. If love is a house, power is zoning law, and Haley understood both. Dani, caught between memory and survival, chose privacy, and that choice was weaponized against her. Silence became guilt in the hands of those who needed a headline. Andre tried to stand beside her like a statue, hoping immobility would read his strength. It read as absence. He watched the woman he married commit to grace while the man she used to love committed to penance, and in that crosscurrent he lost the one thing he once offered: shelter. He sought out Ashley to confess the ache of irrelevance without using the word. The ache stayed. Into this fatigue, Haley placed a final piece, a legal maneuver dressed as a safety measure. She proposed a temporary financial trust to stabilize shared obligations, a document designed to freeze Bill out of his own autonomy under the banner of community protection. It was clever, plausible, almost kind. It also required signatures from people who had been softened by favors and hardened by fear. By the time Bill learned of it, the ink on the preparatory letters was dry. When he arrived to contest, he found not opponents but concern. Concern is a better weapon than anger because you can't punch it. He left those meetings with hands that couldn't stop shaking. It is difficult to keep breathing when your future has been notarized by your past. The day the trust executed, the phone stopped being a lifeline and became an alarm. Alerts came in from banks, boards, committees, all with the same sedated tone. Someone in the office brought him water and told him to take a day. He took 3 and woke into a narrative where his love story had become an executive summary of instability. Haley didn't need to prove he was dangerous, she only needed to prove he was unpredictable. In places like Fairmont Crest, unpredictability is the only unforgivable sin. Dani tried to reach him and discovered the new perimeter around his life, built from procedures and protocols, the kind that save institutions while isolating people. She met with counsel who advised distance, then with friends who advised faith, and finally with herself, who advised oxygen. She declined a televised charity seat that would have restored some public luster because she refused to launder her heart through a camera. That decision cost her invitations she never wanted but still hurt to lose. Haley unveiled her masterpiece at a memorial disguised as a fundraiser, where grief and generosity could be braided into a rope strong enough to drag a reputation. She honored community losses, then presented a new foundation initiative inspired by resilience, naming Dani as an honorary figure in absentia, a gesture that performed magnanimity and implied consent. She asked the room to applaud courage. The room complied. Bill watched from the back, knowing the one thing he could not say out loud, that generosity in the wrong hands is a lock. He left before the final toast, stood in the parking lot, and tasted the medal of despair. The choice that began in devotion had ended in logistics. The phone buzzed again, another well-meaning warning dressed as a favor. He put it on silent and walked until the path ran out. The next week delivered the sequence that breaks even the strongest spines. A compliance audit misinterpreted as malice. A board vote that temporarily reassigned leadership. A covering article that praised stability while freezing history. In the silence between emails, the truth became unbearable. He had knelt for love and risen into quarantine. Dani faced her own reckoning on a quiet morning when a courier delivered a letter written in immaculate legal language that referred to her as a contingent variable in a risk assessment. It was not an accusation, it was worse. It was a categorization. She understood then that staying neutral was not a shield, it was an invitation. People who speak in metrics had folded her into the math. She went to the water's edge and let the wind inventory her regrets. When she returned, she found Andre packing the kind of bag that means absence without departure. He wasn't leaving, he was making space for a vacuum to fill. In that figured vacancy, rumors arrived, quiet suggestions that Dani had encouraged the scene at the gala to force Haley's hand. The allegation wasn't believed by the decent, it was merely useful to the powerful. The decent are frequently outvoted. Haley's last card wasn't a document but a story told in rooms that ask for phones at the door. She framed Bill as a man in free fall and Dani as the net that would tear under the strain, then positioned herself as the adult who keeps the building open and the lights on. It is hard to argue with electricity. By the time the city tired of the scandal, the damage had been normalized and the cruelty anonymized. Bill's accounts were prudently supervised, his schedule sensibly limited, his presence respectfully managed. Dani's invitations were thoughtfully reconsidered, her alliances naturally shifted, her sanity privately praised and publicly diluted. Andre became the definition of absence, a man who cannot compete with ghosts. Haley, smiling in portraits that would age well, quietly consolidated a version of victory that looks like stewardship from a distance and control at arm's length. The negative ending is not loud, it is thorough. Bill does not collapse on marble, he folds in the dark where paperwork lives. Dani does not scream on staircases, she learns the cost of choosing herself too late and loving someone too long. Haley does not throw glasses against walls, she perfects the art of never needing to. Fairmont Crest moves on because places like this always do, feeding on new spectacles while digesting old ones into legend. The trilogy of apology, calculation, and silence becomes the permanent exhibit. The man who kneeled is remembered as reckless, the woman he loved as combustible, and the wife who survived as inevitable. In the end, despair here is not a catastrophe, it is a climate. Bill keeps walking the grounds at odd hours, mapping routes that lead nowhere because nowhere is the only place he can move without permission. Dani stares at calendars she didn't choose, counting how many days a heart can hold its breath. Haley oversees a future curated to prevent mess, a museum of order where love is considered a high-risk installation. And behind the gates, the security lights hum like a lullaby for people who no longer sleep. As the lights at Fairmont Crest fade, the glass walls no longer flaunt splendor, they simply mirror the fresh fractures that just appeared. From Bill's kneeling to Haley's frozen stare and Dani's broken breaths, it feels as if everyone has stepped past a line that cannot be uncrossed. The whispers have already left the ballroom, slipped through the corridors, past the gates, and become a current of public opinion no one can dam. The future is now an open chessboard where every piece can turn into a double-edged blade. Bill has pushed his entire heart into the pot, yet the bill seems only to be coming due, financial commitments are scrutinized, philanthropic circles wobble, and the trust of those who once called him friend thins like morning mist over a lake. Dani stands on the border between memory and reality, knowing that every next decision will trigger a chain reaction. If she reaches out, a storm will hit; if she turns away, she will live with a wound that never closes. And Haley, the one who knows how to turn loss into leverage, may not strike head-on. She has time and allies to weave a safety net for herself and a maze for opponents. In this tableau, no one truly wins, only those who can outlast the pain. At this fragile threshold, questions demand answers. Is the kneeling a belated act of repentance or the opening salvo of a dangerous reconstruction? Does Dani possess the steel to choose a path that upends the town, or will she choose a peace that costs her sense of self? Will Haley lower her serene mask one more notch to reveal a key she's hidden, or will she smile and let everyone trip into their own traps? Secrets buried too long always leak. When they surface, they do not care which version of the story you prepared. Behind those dazzling gates, the slam of a door isn't necessarily an ending, it may be the cue for a darker chapter, where pride is trial by fire, love is weighed against advantage, and trust becomes the rarest luxury. If this is the starting gun for a new storm, each person must choose a weapon. Bill can choose the naked truth, Dani can choose the cool discipline of resolve, Haley can choose patient calculation. The storm will blow out a few lights, tear down a few curtains, and push those who stood closest to opposite ends of the battlefield. Yet even if everyone has to stand in the dark, a single flash remains, the instant when truth can no longer be distorted. When it strikes, who will dare to look straight at it? Who will kneel a second time? And who will never rise again? If you're ready to step deeper into the vortex of secrets, deceit, and ruthless decisions, drop your thoughts below. What is Dani's next move? What price will Bill pay? And how many unturned cards does Haley still hold? Hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter, where every frame pulls us further into the heart of Fairmont Crest, where love can become evidence, and forgiveness, sometimes, the heaviest sentence of all.